Wow. We're going to start with our scripture reading, so if you can stand for the reading of the word. We are going to be reading, and I'm going to be reading from here because I don't want to stand out there, but we're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 18. So I know it's a bit of a haul, but bear with me, okay? Do not judge so that you won't be judged, for you will be judged by the same standard with which you judge others, and you will be measured by the same measure you use. Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the beam of wood in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the splinter out of your eye, and look, there's a great big beam of wood in your own eye? Hypocrite, first take the beam of wood out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. Don't give what is holy to dogs, or toss your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them under their feet, turn and tear you to pieces. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Who among you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks him for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give you good things to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them, for this is the law and the prophets. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate, and how difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it. Be on your guard against false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravaging wolves. You'll recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. This is the word of the Lord. Okay, you can sit down. And let me start I forgot to start my timer in there. Hang on. All right. So this is a long passage. That was a lot of stuff that you just read. And so I was trying to think of where do you start with something like this. And I thought about it for a while, and I think that the best place to start is actually to jump right into the middle. So in the middle, Matthew writes about the narrow gate and the broad gate. He says, enter the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it. So you have this picture. We talk about going through life. This is like how we live our Christian life. We're living our Christian life as a journey. We're going down a path. We're going to go through the gate, and there's something on the other side. So you have a narrow gate that leads to life, and you have a broad gate that leads to destruction. And you have a broad path leading to the broad gate, and you have a narrow path leading to the narrow gate. So the first question that came to mind when I was looking at that is, what is that narrow gate? Because obviously the narrow gate is what we want to go through. And the narrow gate is Jesus. So if you think about other places, in John, Jesus says, I'm the door to the sheep. Also, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. There's only one gate, and that gate is Jesus. But Jesus is a narrow gate, okay? Why is this gate narrow? So the next question, why isn't it a broad gate that leads to life? And the gate isn't narrow because you've got millions of people trying to crowd through it, and it's trying to keep people out. It's not narrow for that reason at all. It's narrow because the path is hard. Few people find it. It's as wide as it needs to be to let the people in who find the gate. So right away, this is telling us something. It's telling us that walking the Christian walk, walking towards Jesus, entering the narrow gate, is actually really hard. So we get to the narrow gate by going down the narrow path. So we got a narrow path. The narrow path's hard to find. I don't know how many of you have gone out hiking in the woods down a narrow path. So you go down the narrow path, you can't find it. In fact, my husband will confirm this. If Mark and I are going down the narrow path, he better be in front because I will not find the path. Okay, I'm notorious for losing the path. So the narrow path is hard to find. But what does the narrow path actually mean in terms of our walk with Christ? It's all very hypothetical. It's hard. It's something hard. But what does it really mean? And I would say, just judging from where this thing is sitting in Matthew, the narrow path has a lot to do with how we love God and how we love each other. So it is all about our relationships and our care for each other and our love for God. And if you think about it in the grand setting of Matthew, if you can go all the way back to when Josh was preaching in Matthew early, you see that we have this vocation to love and to love God and to love our neighbors, and that is kind of then carried through a lot of different statements like, you can't serve God and money and things like that. So we have this whole thing setting in, and you go into Matthew chapter 7, and he's talking all about how we relate to each other in terms of love. So that's the piece we're going to focus on now. So one of the things we know from the scriptures is that how we love each other, so we can measure how we love God related to how well we love each other. In fact, loving God and loving each other are completely intertwined in one another. If we don't love our neighbor, then we don't love God. And it says very clearly this in 1 John 4:20 and 21. It says, if anyone says, I love God, and yet hates his brother or sister, he is a liar. For the person who does not love his brother or sister whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And we have this command from him, the one who loves God must also love his brother and sister. So we see, we have access to all the people around us and all the people in the world, and how well we love them. It's easy to love them because we see them. And if we learn how to love them, we can also learn how to love God in the process of loving each other. So they're completely tangled together. So I'm going to take a little bit of a diversion off here and talk a little bit about kind of how I view relationships and how I view what it means to love each other. So if we look at, Jackie, we should have a picture up there. Yes. We have two people who are trying to relate to each other here in this picture, okay? And don't know each other. There's no connection between these people at all. It may be someone you meet on the street. It may be, whoever, okay? So what you want to do with this person, if you want to connect with them, you've obviously got to build a bridge between you, okay? So we have a lovely bridge here. And building a bridge means that you're understanding each other, you're working on trying to connect with each other in some way, okay? And if someone is really similar to you, that bridge is very easy to form, okay? Like, I feel like with Lisa, we have a lot of similarities. It's easy for us to understand and relate to each other, but if I take someone like, I'm not going to pick someone, but someone who's very different from me. All right, I'll pick Ian. Thank you. Ian, he volunteered. If I take someone like Ian, it's a bit harder, right? Because we don't have as much in common, right? We don't have a common ability to, go down to common things between us. So, and if you think about things that other people in other cultures, or people who are severely disabled, or people who are, we just have a harder time building that bridge. But we still want to build the bridge. So if you notice, however, that this bridge has a problem, it's kind of sitting in midair, right? So there's a foundation to this bridge, and that foundation has to do with how we accept one another, okay? So let's think about accepting and what that means. Hang on. So, if we look at the life of Jesus, we see him as modeling this acceptance, okay? So he sees, his future disciples, and he says, come, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. He's accepting that they're fishermen, and he's drawing them in on that commonality of fishing, right? Or he reaches out to the woman at the well, and he's accepting her in a way that no one else is accepting her. Or you look at even some of his disciples. He obviously had to accept his disciples, but you've got the idea of, Simon the Zealot, who is very different from Matthew the tax collector. And he's still accepting them all. He's still bringing them into his fold. They're still people he's teaching and loving. When we look at our church today, what accepting looks like is we're all different, all right? I'm not like Ian, right? Exactly. So we're all different, and that diversity, as Joshua was pointing out, means that each one of us has a different little lens on the infinite, really unknowable God. And there's no shortage of different ways to look at God. We're all looking at him in different ways, but we each learn how to understand God better by seeing him through each other's eyes, okay? So we do that by being in relationship with each other, by connecting with each other. We also do it by supporting and encouraging each other, because that helps us to get to know each other and see how God's working in the other person to glorify himself. So in Romans 12, 1 and 2, he says, now we who are strong have an obligation to bear the weaknesses of those who are without strength. So here we have a difference, right? Strong without strength. And not to please ourselves. Each of us is to please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. So this building up is part of how we see God in each other, okay? I mean, it's also a part of a lot of things, but I just want to look at it from that perspective at the moment. So let's talk about what acceptance really is, because I think this is a word that we get very confused about. So to my mind, what acceptance means is that you understand and look to understand the differences between you and the other person. You know they're there. You acknowledge they're there. You try to understand how they are, and you still try to build a relational bridge despite what you see. So in Ephesians 4:2, Paul talks to us about walking in a manner worthy of the calling you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So we're looking at the differences, we're acknowledging the differences, and we're working and striving towards unity despite the differences, okay? So let's talk about some things acceptance is not, because I think here's where we get very confused. Acceptance is not about agreement. I don't have to agree with you on anything in order to accept you, okay? If you look at Jesus, he didn't agree with his disciples a lot. I mean, he said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." How disagreeing can that be? But he did accept them. So acceptance means that you work to build the bridge knowing full well what those disagreements are, okay? Another thing acceptance isn't is approval. I don't have to approve of what you're doing or approve of anything about you in order to accept you. And in fact, I would go so far as to say if you are disapproving of somebody and you are using that as the prime way that you're relating to them, you are rejecting them, you are not accepting them, okay? So acceptance can have nothing to do with approval, Another thing acceptance is not is trust, okay? I don't have to accept you. I can accept you even if I don't trust you. So when you are trying to accept someone who you don't trust, you're working in the context of that lack of trust to still build the bridge. Okay, I don't know how clear that is, but I'm going to do an example later that might help you sort through that. But I think it's really important for us to realize that trust is something that the other person has to earn. It's not something that you can generate because you accept them. Okay. So what I wrote here is acceptance means you work forward in the context of a broken and fragile trust in a way that honors the lack of trust. Okay. A lot of the talk about boundary setting and stuff goes on the edges of what this is talking about. Okay, well, so we have this foundation of acceptance, but that foundation is actually built on the bedrock of something else, and the bedrock of the something else is that Christ accepted us to the glory of God, okay? So if you think about me and any other person, or you and any other person in this earth, even the person you feel the most distant from on earth, and you think about the gap and the effort that it would take to build that bridge, the bridge between us and God is infinitely bigger than that gap, okay? There's a huge, infinite chasm between us and God in general. He's infinite, we're finite. You know, he is perfect, and we're definitely not perfect. And if you think about Christ and his life, what did Christ do? He worked to build the bridge. And how he built that bridge is he became one of us so he could empathize with us, understand us, look at the world through our position. He connected with us, he taught us, and then he did the ultimate sacrifice that would enable us to start building a little bit of our side of the bridge, and that he redeemed us from our brokenness on the cross. So there's an infinite chasm. We had no material or no nothing to build that bridge. And God in his mercy took that infinite chasm and made it bridgeable. And we rest our acceptance on other people on that foundation entirely. So, and then, of course, the ultimate purpose in all of this is he's shown us this huge picture of acceptance so that we can accept each other even when it's difficult by relying on his acceptance of us and living under the embrace of that acceptance and moving forward. And the ultimate result of that is that as we all learn to accept each other in this way, we become unified under him in his kingdom, and God is glorified in that unity. And I can't emphasize how much I believe that our unity is the thing that glorifies God but maybe not the most, but really big in the world, is how united we are. When we give that picture of unity under Christ in his sacrifice, then we glorify God. Okay, so I've just given you a lot of abstract stuff, maybe a little bit of concrete stuff, but I did want to talk about this in the context of an example, because if you look at, again, the first part of Matthew 7, before these verses about the narrow and the wide gates, we're talking about things that we do in terms of how we relate to other people. And what does that walking that narrow path look like when we're related to other people? So I am going to tell. I asked my daughter explicitly if I could tell this. She's an adult now, married, all that stuff. I I asked her if I could tell the story of my daughter and the really bad boyfriend. So we're going to talk about my daughter and the really bad boyfriend today. So let me tell you a little bit about the really bad boyfriend. I'm giving no names. So when she was about 20 years old, my daughter came home, she called us on the phone, and she said she had a really cool new boyfriend. And so, we asked her a few questions, and like any concerned parents, the first thing we're going to do is poke around and figure out what we know about this boyfriend. So we hit Google, browsed around, and it took Mark and I maybe 2 minutes to figure out that this was a bad idea. Okay, so we're getting things like, oh yeah, I really like to manipulate people to do what I want all the time. And I'm like sitting there looking at my daughter, and I'm looking at him, I'm like, manipulate, and he's talking about his exploits in various ways, and they're not exploits that we would even vaguely approve of. It was really scary to think that this guy was close to my daughter. And so we're going to talk about how we navigated that with her, because I think that's an example of how we tried to find that narrow path. So let's start out with Matthew 7:6. So this is the first verse that speaks into how we responded to this. Matthew 7:6 says, "Don't give what is holy to dogs, or toss your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them under their feet, turn and tear you to pieces." So what does this mean? I don't know about you, but we don't have a lot of pigs. I don't think we have a lot of pearls either, honestly, so hang on a sec. So this seems a little bit meaningless, but I think what this is saying to us is that you have a pearl, which is a valuable thing. You have a pig, which is like the lowest of low animals in the Hebrew culture. And pigs eat everything. They trample, they root around. They're kind of messy. And they certainly don't appreciate pearls. And so instead of appreciating the value of your gift, they trample it. So I kind of interpret this as what I say and how I respond to something. I can't necessarily be putting out words or saying things that they're not ready to hear, that they're just going to trample over. So I would summarize this as, don't waste your wisdom. So how do I do this normally, and how did this work in this situation with my daughter and the really bad boyfriend? Well, so practically at this point in time, I follow kind of a guideline that I never say anything more than twice, maybe sometimes not more than once. Because if you say it and it gets discarded, and you keep saying it and it keeps getting discarded, what happens is the person ceases to value what you're saying. It's almost like they're trampling over things. So I realize that there's only so many times I can say something to someone, and then I've used them all up. And I will have to say, especially for those of you who are parents or spouses, this is a really easy guideline to violate with your kids, with your spouses. It is saying things over and over again to the point where they're tuning you out or just getting really mad at you because you're saying them. So with my daughter, Mark and I, of course, came with our printouts, went up to our daughter and said, "Hey, we don't think this is really a good idea. These are some of the things we're seeing about this guy." And we showed her the parts that we found very alarming. And she said, "Oh, no, well, this is different. This is a different time. He loves me. He's not going to do this to me." Well, we weren't sanguine that this was different. We didn't necessarily think anything had changed. But we also knew at that point, this was in the context of a bigger span in our lifetime when she had stopped trusting us a while ago. So we were still in the process of re-earning trust that we had lost. So we decided that we said it once, and we don't really have a lot of leverage to say it again. So we had to try something different besides explaining to her why this guy was bad and hope that she would see the light and break up with him. So in Matthew 7, verses 7 through 8, it says, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you." I was reading, "For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be open." So go to the Father, get down on our knees, ask, okay? So asking is all about you talk to the Father, you listen and seek the path, the piece of the path. So we're looking for the narrow path now. And then when time is ready, the door will be opened and you can walk through it, okay? So if we're really listening to God well and we're really going in the right direction, then God works in the situation. So with the really bad boyfriend, we did a lot of scripture reading and we talked to a lot of people. And everybody had their opinions. I think we heard thousands of opinions. There are a lot of opinions that we should just cut her off. The thing that we really felt where God was speaking was they said that it was really important not to give the really bad boyfriend the ammunition he needed to tear my daughter further away from us. So the important thing was for us to maintain the relationship with her in the situation. And we also wanted to be sure that when and if, hopefully the when, everything ended with this guy, that she would be coming to us for refuge as opposed to not having anywhere to go. And then the other thing we heard from God was that we needed to do what we needed to do to make sure she was provided for and safe, even in this terrible situation. So now we get to judge not. And Matthew 7, I'm not going to read it. I don't know if it's up. Yeah, in Matthew 7, it talks about don't judge, and taking the log out of our own eyes. So one of the sort of summaries I've seen, one of the best summaries I've seen of how to do this is, there's a quote from Thomas Merton. This up, Jackie? Yeah. He said, "Our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they're worthy." Okay? So why is God saying this? Well, he gives some reasons in the verses, and I'm not going to dwell on them, but I think that it's important to realize that God asks us to join with him in the transformational process of other people. So he is using our lives to affect and transform other people's hearts. And if we start judging or fixing or doing things, we kind of get in the way of that because we don't know. 1 John 3:20 says, God is greater than our hearts and he knows all things. So we don't know all things. He knows all things. And this theme of God knowing infinitely more about things than we do is also present throughout the Bible. You can see remnants of it all the way back to Job and that time. So when we judge, a lot of times judgment comes because we're trying to fix them in some way or make them better or understand something. And this is doing that independently of God's leading. Okay. So we sort of have in mind some expectations around them. And we try to fix them, and effectively what we end up saying is we know better than God what their thing is, but we don't, because God is bigger than our hearts. But I think that judge not is, people tend to stick on this verse a lot. And I think that really the way that you don't judge comes later, and the rest of this little section here is really telling us how not to judge. And it's a better thing to grasp on than don't do this, because you know that if someone says don't do this, what's the first thing you want to do, right? So his method that he's giving us is to take care of our own issues first. Okay, so we're going to take the logs out of our own eyes. So in my experience now, especially in parenting, but in a lot of relationships, taking the logs out of my own eye is one of the most productive things I can do. It's in terms of how I relate to other people. So if I'm having trouble, take the log out of my own eye. If we're having an argument, take the log out of my own eye. It is the most effective thing. Number one, because it's the thing I have control over, right? I can't expect the other person to change. I have control over my own logs. So what are logs? So a lot of times we think, oh, it's our own sin. Yeah, that's true, but you know, it's not, this isn't just saying, you know, if I'm going to tell a person not to steal, I'm going to stop stealing myself. It's not at that level, because there's other things that are a lot more insidious and bring us into judgment than just committing a sin. So for instance, expectations are a big one. I expect you to be like this, okay? In fact, the problem might be my expectation and not how you are. In fact, looking at that expectation and trying to figure out, is that a reasonable expectation? What am I basing that expectation on? That maybe having the wrong expectation is leading me into a bad path in the relationship. Similarly, assumptions. Oh, of course you can do that. You did it yesterday. You know, may not be true. Or, you know, of course you can do it. I can do it. So you have this sort of self-centeredness around your assumptions, like I'm going to assume that you have the same strengths and weaknesses that I have, and therefore, since I can do this, then you can do this. This is all about logs, okay? So when you take the logs out of your own eyes, it's about repenting of a lot of these attitudes, repenting of our unreasonable expectations on other people, repenting of the wrong assumptions we make about them, repenting of our own self-centered lens on who they are. And then, after repenting, you choose to interact with compassion and empathy and forgiveness, okay? You're not gonna say, okay, I've gotten rid of my logs, now let me talk about that speck. No, you don't do that. You just continue on with empathy and compassion, and maybe God at that point leads you to be able to interact with the speck because he's prepared the way for you at that point, okay? So how did this work with my daughter and the really bad boyfriend? So it was very clear from the beginning, we've got a manipulative, abusive, narcissistic guy. I'm just describing him at the moment. I didn't really judge him because that wasn't the behavior that God led me to there. It was really clear that God was really using the situation to stretch and transform my husband and I. If you ever want to fix your communication, have your daughter run off with a bad guy, and you'll really have to work on your relationship with your husband at that point, let me tell you. But it also meant that we didn't criticize the really bad boyfriend. We didn't really condemn the really bad boyfriend. We just kind of went with the flow with the really bad boyfriend. So we didn't even try to compel her to break up with him. I mean, there's no point in compelling her to break up because compelled obedience is not what even God aims for. He doesn't compel obedience. We can't compel obedience either. We also needed to learn to show grace and mercy to them. So we needed to trust in that situation that God was protecting her. We obviously could not protect her. Hang on. We obviously could not protect her well in this situation, so we needed to rely on God protecting her. Lots of prayer. And I don't want you to think that this meant that we weren't concerned for our daughter. It really meant that we had to trust God with our daughter and go with it. So let's get to another point from Matthew 7. Matthew 7:12 says, "Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. For this is the law and the prophets." Okay, so what does it mean to treat someone else the same way you are treated? And I'll tell you something, it doesn't mean that I like ice cream, so therefore I'm going to buy Eileen ice cream. Right? I know Eileen likes ice cream, but, you know. It doesn't mean that. That's not where, it's not saying that on this superficial level. What it's really saying is we all need compassion, we all need grace, we all need mercy, we all need forgiveness. So we extend those things to each other. So we treat each other with compassion, we treat each other with mercy, we treat each other with grace, we forgive them. And this is really kind of the basis of acceptance, coming back to this theme of acceptance or welcoming. We all want to be accepted where we are, in the situation we're at, rather than being rejected for not being that. So that means that we enter into where the person is at the moment, and we extend that compassion and that grace to them. This usually means a lot of patience. They're going to take their own road, and God is transforming them in their own way, so we just need to be patient and let God do his thing. It means being kind. It means connecting. It means accepting regardless of other things. Clearly, we had to accept the really bad boyfriend, even if we agreed with nothing he said, approved of nothing, and didn't trust him for anything, okay? So when we were operating in this state with the really bad boyfriend, where we were not, where we just had to go with the flow, we knew we had to go with the flow, we actually worked pretty hard to develop our relationship with him and maintain our relationship with our daughter. So one of the things we did was we took them out to eat, like once or twice a week. And sometimes that was the only real meal my daughter had that week, so we have to understand the situation underneath. She actually told me later that that was huge in her mind. So we also, when her daughter and the really bad boyfriend decided to move in together into an apartment, we actually rented the apartment beneath it and said, if you need to run, this is your safe bolt hole. Keep your phone on you, keep this key to this apartment on you, and if you need to get away, go to this apartment. So we rented this apartment for the whole time they were living in the other one, so that she would have an escape path, and we equipped it with pepper spray. So, so this kind of shows you how much we actually trusted this guy. And so that was kind of our plan, and we just kept eating with them, and we had the space available, and we kept eating with them. And so this was kind of how it went for probably 6 months, I think. So I have a question, kind of hypothetical question, but I want you to think for a minute. How do you actually know you're on this narrow path? How did we actually know we were on the narrow path with my daughter and the really bad boyfriend? Aside from the fact that we really felt like we were seeking God at every moment. So Matthew 7, verses 16 and 18 says, You'll recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. So if we're walking along this narrow path, the evidence in our life is the fruit that it produces. And I'm not talking about the fruit. I can't really judge, is this making me holier or not? But I can look at the effects of what we did and how it pointed people to God, or at least pointed people to a better place. So we see this fruit is reflected. I guess what I'm trying to say is we see this fruit reflected in how we end up relating with each other. So about 6 months into this process, a little bit less than, we were having dinner with my daughter and the really bad boyfriend at Olive Garden. If you know our family, you know that we always have the most interesting conversations in Olive Garden. And if you ever want to see us in action in all our weirdness, find us in Olive Garden. So the really bad boyfriend asked my husband a question. He said, "Mr. Nodine, why are you so nice to me?" And Mark thought about it for a minute. He said, "Well, here's what I think. You and my daughter are pretty close, and someday you may be married. And it would do well, if you're going to be married to my daughter, for us to have a decent relationship." And he kind of looked at my husband, deer in the headlights, as soon as he said the word marry. He kind of looked at my husband with kind of this slightly horrified face, which was kind of funny. But we just kind of went with it. But a little while later, they actually broke up. And when they broke up, Mark was the person that was mediating how my daughter was going to get her stuff out of the apartment, which was actually pretty difficult. And after that, every time my daughter decided on a new boyfriend, she vetted it with us. It's like, "Hey, can you meet this guy? Hey, can you meet this guy?" So I think there was some pretty good fruit coming out of that, even though it wasn't everything we would have wanted, but it was good fruit in general. So I'm going to close here with a little bit of an exercise. I want to start out with this quote. It's from Miroslav Volf. It says, "The will to give ourselves to others and welcome them, to readjust our identity to make space for them, is prior to any judgment about others, except that of identifying them in their humanity." So I want you to think about this, and I want you to think, we're going to take a little short bit of time in prayer here, but I want you to think about someone that you're having a hard time with, okay? It doesn't have to be the world's biggest offender, just someone you're struggling with. Could be your spouse, you never know. But someone you're having a struggle with, okay? And I want you to start out by thinking about that person, thinking good things about that. So think something about that person that you really appreciate. And I want you to close your eyes, and I'm going to start guiding you through a prayer. Okay, I want you to thank God for something you appreciate about that person. I'm going to give you a minute. So I want you to think about and listen to God and listen to him as he speaks to you about what ways you might be judging or having bad expectations, making bad assumptions about them. And I want you to think about that with respect to that person, and where you see unrealistic expectations, where you see judgment, where you see an attitude of fixing. Let's just repent of that. Take a step back. You're going to side with God because God is transforming them too. They are made in his image. Now I want you to ask God, what does he want you to do in that relationship? What is the next step he wants you to take? How can you join in encouraging and building up this person? And now I want you to explicitly rest in his protection and his guidance in the situation. Claim his presence in that. Claim his victory over the situation. Claim his forgiveness for you in that situation as well. I'm going to close us in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you, especially as we move into communion now, which is just such a wonderful celebration of how you accepted us and what you had to do to build that bridge between us. Lord, I pray that we would learn to rely on the firm foundation of your acceptance for us. Father, I pray that you would open our eyes and teach us how to love each other well, how to accept each other, how to care for each other. Father, teach us compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, because that's how you relate to us, and that's how you call us to relate to others. Thank you for your compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness towards us as well. And Father, as we move into this time of communion, I ask that you would very much keep that in mind, keep that acceptance in mind. Lord, that's a part of your covenant with us, your covenant of love, your covenant of support. And Father, I pray that we would be walking steps with you as we go through our lives and our relationships with others. In Jesus' name, amen.